there. In this video, we're going to talk about feeding the TIG wire. I was lucky enough years ago to have a part-time job after my day job welding aluminum parts on a positioner. And that helped me get my filler rod hand up to speed quick because these are big round parts just as fast as I could go. And then so when I went back to feeding any other rod at a normal speed, I was thinking, man, this is a lot easier now than it was then. So today we're going to put an aluminum part on a positioner. We've got plenty of arc shots, plenty of shots of feeding their wire. We're going to talk about some tips for that. Let's hit it. I'm using the Prime Weld 225 today, and I'm plugged into the wall with 115 volt power, 110 amps, and I'm going to use all of it. AC frequency set between 100 and 120 hertz. I set my pre-flow at about a second. It gives me a better start on aluminum. It really helps to have some gloves where you can feel the TIG wire. I'll be using 53, 56, 332 filler metal to start. And I have a piece of 3-inch, quarter-inch wall tubing chucked up in a positioner here. I'm using a tapered tip so it'll give me a nice crisp arc start at low amperage. Then I'll go full pedal to 110 amps. It'll take it a second or two to heat up enough. And then I'll probably have to back off of the amperage a little bit. That's pretty typical with aluminum once a piece gets heat saturated. We're going to take a look at the filler rod hand quite a bit in this video. This is just one perspective, one angle. You can't see a whole lot from here. But if you'll stay tuned, you'll see a lot of different angles of the filler rod hand and some tips for feeding filler rod in general. Like I mentioned earlier, I had a moonlighting job where I had to weld a whole bunch of round parts on a positioner, aluminum concrete cutting saws. And I had to do them pretty quickly too, and so I kind of played a game with myself to see how fast I could go and how fast I could feed the rod. Aside from making pretty good money at it, what I really noticed was it really helped me get my filler rod hand up to speed. If you have never put a camera on your filler rod hand while you're TIG welding, I encourage you to do that because you probably learn a few things just by seeing how you actually feed rod. I would tell people often that this is how I feed TIG rod, that I push it with these two fingers. But then when I put a camera on my hand, that is not what I'm doing. So, you know, when the hood drops. All right, on this second bead, we're going to look at the filler rod hand from a little bit different perspective. I find it kind of interesting that I would tell somebody one way I feed rod, and then when I put the camera on, I'm doing it kind of different. It's true that when that helmet drops, you're in a little bit of a different world. And I think that actually that's what a lot of us welders like, is that we can zone out. When you're intensely focused on the puddle, you're not thinking about any problems or anything like that. You're just completely focused, but I think also you're not really aware of exactly what your hands are doing. Which is why, again, I think it's a good idea to film yourself and see what you are doing. This is just one of many methods you could use to feed TIG rod. There are lots of different ways. Just have to find something that works for you and then try to get better at it. This technique is working okay for me right here, but if I was welding vertical uphill on something, I would probably use a different method, prop my hand in a different way. But this method works good for me on a positioner like this where I'm all steady and propped up, or flat on a bench where I'm just running a bead. This is a number 7 cup. I'm using 2% lanthanated 332 diameter electrode, and you can see it's maintaining a taper pretty well. It's rounded on the tip a little bit, but it's not completely balled up. If you've been watching me for very long at all, you know I use 2% lanthanated for almost everything. I just feel like it's a easy way to keep things simple. It works. It's a good all-purpose electrode. Not necessarily the best for every single situation. It's just a good all-purpose electrode if you're constantly switching back between DC and AC. And I do. I switch back and forth because I make videos. I know there are people out there who just can't seem to learn to feed rod due to nerve damage, injury, arthritis, etc. And if that's you, this next little clip is just for you. What I would do is sometimes choosing a rod one size bigger can help, and gripping it back about 11 inches or so can help. You're not going to feed rod, so you need the rod a little stiffer. You don't want it dangling around there. And you just don't feed, you just gradually move your hand in. You can only weld, let's say, 9 or 10 inches at a time before stopping and re-gripping, but that's okay. I remember working with another pipe welder on a job one time, and he had a prosthetic hook on his feeder hand, and he just figured out how to work around that. So there's always a way to do it. I think it's best to learn to feed the rod if you can. When you do step up to a bigger rod, like right now this is a 1/8 instead of a 332, you just have to be careful how much you add. You're going to just dab a little bit of wire. And this bead didn't come out quite as good as the other, but it's not far off. Let's take a quick look and see how that tip of the tungsten's holding up. Not too bad, still got a taper on it with a little rounded tip. I know most folks don't have a turntable like I do, but you can do the same similar drill just on a flat piece of metal, running bead after bead, patting aluminum beads. You can still get your filler hand up to speed by doing that. A turntable just makes it a little bit easier for me to film, but just get a flat piece of metal about 1/8 of an inch thick. You can start off making short runs in one direction, and once you're a little bit more comfortable, make a longer run. And the trick here is to do this very intentionally. Think about what you're doing. Look at each bead and inspect each bead. Did you do it evenly? Did you add the right amount of filler wire? What are you doing with your hand? Think about that. How could you do it better? Try speeding up, try slowing down, things like that. The reason you do this on aluminum is because you feed so much more wire with aluminum that it makes you feed more wire, and it makes you get better at feeding wire. Another benefit to using aluminum is you don't have to wire brush between passes or anything like that. So you concentrate your seat time and your welding time with very little prep, very little cleaning. You just really need to have two pieces so that you can alternate and let one of them cool while you're welding on the other one for best results.
Well, sometimes it helps to get a lighter glove on your filler rod hand. This is just a regular cotton jersey glove. For some people that helps in feeding the wire to get a lighter glove. I don't really have any trouble feeding with one of these stubby gloves. I can feel the wire pretty good, but there are instances where this one might be better for your filler rod hand.
Now I've flipped the piece over sideways. I'm going to stack a few beads over that way. 110 amps is still enough because there's so much heat put into the piece now. I'm back to using 332 filler metal now. Back to feeding it. And I set the positioner up a little bit faster than what I would like, so it's making me have to feed a little bit more than once a second, more like 2 dabs a second right here. That's causing me to work a little harder with my filler wire hand, but that's part of the drill. You want to push the envelope a little bit. I'm not going to do anything with this piece. When I'm done with it, it's going to be scrap. I don't really care what it looks like. What I want to do is push the envelope and get a little bit better at feeding filler wire. That's the whole idea behind using a positioner to train your filler wire hand. And you can see again from this perspective that I'm using my thumb more than anything to push wire through my 2 fingers.
I should be able to roll, so I'm just going to roll.
Okay, we're going to do one more bead, get a whole nother perspective, another close-up of the filler wire hand, and a close-up arc shot from a different perspective here to see what's going on. I bought my first turntable back in the mid-90s when I got an order for a couple hundred small round parts about 2 inches in diameter. They were stainless parts. They needed to be really good looking and uniform. I couldn't see welding 200 parts without a positioner, so I ordered one on eBay, never looked back. I ordered it because my customer had a contract for doing a couple hundred a month. So I thought, well, this is going to be gravy. Every month I'm going to do 200 of these. Well, that fell through, but other jobs came along that helped me pay for that thing in no time. And I'm not sorry that I bought it. And this is not that same positioner. I've had several since then. This is an MK Cobra turn. It's got a lot of features that I didn't have on my first one, with a digital readout and things like that. And I would highly recommend a digital readout if you're thinking about getting one. This one's got a digital readout. None of the rest of the ones that I've had digital readout, but I figured out how to dial them in anyway. And now the next step in getting filler rod hands up to speed would be using your non-dominant hand on a setup like this.
There's a lot of different ways to feed it, depending on your position, depending on what you're doing. There are all different methods. You just have to find out what works for you. I hope this video helps give you some ideas.